Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Mackenzie, and I am the Community and Provider Education Coordinator for NAMI Maryland. I will be the moderator for our webinar today, along with my colleague, Maria. Depressive disorder, frequently referred to simply as depression, is more than just feeling sad or going through a rough patch. Clinical depression is a serious medical condition that requires understanding and medical care and affects how people feel, how they think, and how they behave. Left untreated, it can damage relationships, careers, and can even become life-threatening. When someone you love and care about experiences symptoms of a mental health condition, you face unique challenges yourself, including complex family dynamics, social isolation, and often unpredictable as well as hurtful behavior. Today's webinar is supported by the William S. Perper Foundation, and we are hosting two special guests, Reverend Pamula Yerby-Hammack and Dr. Dan Hale, as they share their own personal struggles with depression and how to live well in recovery.
Before we get started, we wanted to note just a few housekeeping points. To avoid background noise, all participants will be muted for the duration of the webinar. We will be addressing questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions as the webinar continues, please enter the questions into the box, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen if viewing from a computer, or the bottom of your screen if viewing from a phone. We will be reviewing questions as they come in, and if something in particular is unclear or needs to be expanded upon, we will ask our speakers to do so when the question is asked. If you have any comments or concerns during the webinar, please also enter them into the questions box. We will review and address any immediate needs that also occur. A recording of this webinar will be emailed to each registrant tomorrow. The recording will also be available on our website at www.namimd.org for any individuals that were unable to register. Continuing education units are not available for today's webinar. A certificate of attendance will, however, be sent to each registered participant tomorrow afternoon. After the webinar today, you will be asked to complete a short survey on the aspects of this webinar that you felt were helpful, could be improved, and what you would like to see in future webinars. Each person that completes the survey will be entered into a drawing to win a $25 Amazon gift card, and this is only one webinar in a series of educational webinars that NAMI Maryland plans to host. Additional topics within our series include treatment and beyond treatment supports. We ask that you please fill out the survey to let us know how NAMI Maryland can better support you at this time.
I'd like now to welcome our speakers for today's webinar, Reverend Yerby-Hammack and Dr. Dan Hale. Reverend Yerby-Hammack has been preaching since 1994. She is the founder for Wind of Change Ministries, Inc., a ministry for women, and the executive pastor of the City of Abraham Church and Ministries. She holds a certificate of religious studies, a bachelor's degree in theology from the Eastern Maryland Theological Seminary, and has completed several programs to further her studies through the Johns Hopkins Medical Center. Reverend Yerby-Hammack has served in churches across the country and in a variety of capacities in organizations such as hospitals, prisons, jails, and shelters. She is a pastor, preacher, teacher, administrator, and author. Her book, Flying with One Wing, God's Grace in Our Times of Adversity, was published in 2018 as a personal, transparent account of what mental illness can often look like. It is a voice for the voiceless, hope for the hopeless, and encouragement for all those dealing with mental illness. Her testimony has been used to minister to the area of mental health to help reduce stigma, raise awareness, and push for advocacy within the church community. Dr. Dan Hale is Special Advisor to the President of Johns Hopkins Bayview Medical Center and Director of the Healthy Community Partnership. He is also an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine with appointments in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Gerontology. Prior to assuming his position at Johns Hopkins Bayview in 2011, he was the professor of clinical psychology at Stetson University. He is the author of several books, including Depression, Out of the Darkness and Into the Light, In 2016, he was named Mental Health Professional of the Year by NAMI Metropolitan Baltimore, and in 2018, he received the Maryland Foundation for Psychiatry Anti-Stigma Advocacy Prize. Thank you, Reverend Yerby-Hammack and Dr. Dan Hale, for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I'd like to thank NAMI Maryland and Dr. Dan Hale for inviting me to join in this important discussion today. On Thursday, October the 18th, as I taught my small women's group from the topic, "The Struggle is Real," I had no idea that I was about to face the struggle of my life. My world stopped for me on Friday, October the 19th in 2012, as I woke up in the early morning and I had a fall that came from out of nowhere. I had no idea that when I was getting up from that fall, that I was entering into a world of darkness, of despair, and sadness. My life for me had changed, and it had changed drastically. Before that day, I considered myself a happy-go-lucky person, getting up every morning, dealing with my life, taking care of my home, my husband, taking care of the responsibilities I had at work and at church. But my life had taken a drastic turn. So what happened after my fall? For about a month, I struggled with dealing with fear and panic. This was a fear and a panic that I had not known before, being afraid of things that were not even rational. I became afraid of my family, afraid of my living space. My home became a place of fear. There was so much confusion. I was confused about what I was experiencing. I was confused about what was happening in me. I could not really verbalize or tell what was happening because I didn't even know myself what was happening. I had extreme sadness. This was more than just the usual, I don't feel well today, or I'm a little bit sad, but this was a sadness that stretched forward to every day, a sadness that felt like it would not stop. I found that I lost my appetite. I couldn't eat. I was even concerned that I was maybe experiencing anorexia. I didn't know. To eat small bites, I could not even do that. And I love to eat. I really love food, but I could not eat. I had lost my appetite. As a result of not being able to eat, normally I lost much weight. I think I lost close to 10 pounds, if not about 10 pounds, during this time before I was even able to get help. I had trouble with sleeping. Sometimes I had trouble falling asleep, and I definitely had trouble staying asleep. I would wake up every night, probably between 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning. Every night I would wake up and not be able to fall back to sleep. I struggled with what I learned were untrustworthy thoughts. They were my thoughts, but I couldn't trust them because I would have to learn how to sort out what was actually the truth from those things that were lies, that weren't really true. I had a lack of enjoyment. I enjoyed my life. I enjoyed the ministry work that I did. I enjoyed the work that I did in the workplace. I enjoyed my coworkers, but I lost the enjoyment of those things that would make me happy. I learned later from one of my coworkers that one of the conferences that I would attend in June, and I would always be so excited about, as I began to talk to her about what may have happened before October the 19th, she said that when I came back from that conference, that I didn't have that same excitement. And so even before October, I was starting to spiral out, but I had no knowledge of it. I had trouble with decision making in my life. And I also became very codependent upon my daughter. I felt I couldn't trust anybody in my space. I've always had supportive parents. My family has always been supportive. My husband was supportive. But in this moment, I couldn't trust anyone. My daughter had become my safe place and my safe haven. I needed her with me every step of the way. My gait changed, and I found myself not walking with confidence, but I shuffled alone. There are still things that in my life during that time that I still don't remember about that situation. When my world began to spiral downward and I lost the ability to work, I couldn't work anymore. I was in school at the time working on my Master's of Divinity degree. I couldn't concentrate enough on my studies, and so I eventually had to drop out of seminary at that time and forget about schoolwork. I left my husband because I thought my husband was the reason for all my troubles. I knew I wasn't especially happy in the days before this. So I decided that he must be the reason that I'm not happy at this moment. And I left him. As a result of leaving my husband, I spent time staying with my parents and staying with my daughter and staying with my baby sister for a few moments. I eventually went back home, but it was still not a safe place for me because my home was very fearful. I felt like I was no longer comfortable living in my home, which I love, and I enjoyed living in my home. As you can see by this slide, my environment reflected the clutter that was in my mind, the confusion, the chaos, the untrustworthy thoughts, the trouble with decision making. And this slide actually is a picture of my office. My office was a place where I enjoyed working. It was where I wrote sermons and teachings, and I enjoyed the work that I did. But as you can see, that space became very, very cluttered. Not only my office became cluttered, but actually parts of my home became very cluttered. I would have books and papers everywhere. The dining room table would be filled with books and paper. I had lost the ability to take care of my home. I lost the ability to take care of my personal hygiene. It became a fearful thing for me to even take a shower, because the shower, to me, from the shower head, it seemed like a monster. Like it was almost as if the water had teeth. I became very, very fearful. And anytime I would take a bath or a shower, I would need my husband or my daughter to sit there and to watch me because I thought something would happen. I lived with these symptoms for over a month. And then on Tuesday, November the 27th, 2012, a few days after Thanksgiving, I was able to have my world start again. Actually, the day before Thanksgiving, because of everything that was going on in my life, I didn't know what was wrong. Medically, I was fine. I had gone to my primary care doctor and I was fine medically, but I didn't know what was going on in my mind. I found myself walking into the crisis center of the Shepherd Pratt Hospital. And after seeing the psychiatrist for that day and talking with her, she believed that I was a perfect candidate for the Shepherd Pratt Adult Day Hospital. And so on Tuesday, November 27th, I entered Shepherd Pratt. And every day for 2 weeks, from about 8:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., my day would be the same, but it would be the process for which I would start to recover. I would start to learn what life was all about. I would take time looking at me, which I had not learned to, or didn't really want to look at my life. You know, I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor, and I did very well helping other people to get through their own issues, their own troubles. But I found that to look at myself was hard for me. I struggled over the years since a young child from low self-worth, low self-esteem. I found out that I didn't really like myself, even though other people liked me, but I thought people only liked me because of what I did, because I was a singer in the 80s and because I was a preacher now. And it was very difficult for me to like me and appreciate the gifts and the talents that I brought into the world. So for every day in that time at the adult day hospital, I saw a nurse who would ask me how my night had been, to ask me questions about whether I wanted to harm myself or harm other people. She would ask me how the medications were doing, any side effects, those types of things. I met with my psychiatrist. I met with a social worker who I really adored. And then I went through support groups all day long. There were support groups, there were therapy sessions, and I was joining in with other people who were functioning in their own world, but yet we had these areas of brokenness, areas in our lives that we just couldn't cope with. I went through such therapy groups as CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, that would help me identify whether the thoughts that I was thinking, whether they were actually realistic or not. There was art therapy and music therapy. And because I like music and I enjoy art as well, you would think that those things would have been places I enjoyed, but yet I really didn't enjoy those times. I really wish that I didn't have to go. Other therapy I received was I was given medications, psychiatric medications, which was scary for me. I had heard bad things, not from the medical community, but from other people who said that psych meds were not good and I would not deal with them. So I reluctantly did take those medications. I received medications for anxiety and depression. The next year in 2013, I was weaned off of the depression med, and I started to feel some relief. My life was starting to open up again. I could see clearly, a lot clearly now. My thoughts were starting to go to be a place where I could trust them to be my thoughts, where I could identify what was true and what was not true again. And so the encouraging thing is that there is hope. You're looking at slides now. That cluttered office is now how that office began to look. I was able to, with the support from family and friends, get rid of all the clutter and put this office back together again. This office is beautiful now. It's no longer my office, but it is my prayer room, and it's beautiful now. So for anyone who may be struggling with depression or anxiety or any other mental illness, I would encourage you to stay the course, because recovery is a process. My treatment plan consisted of talk therapy, medication, support from family and friends. I began to educate myself in my own illness, and I continued through my own spiritual disciplines and my religious practices, those things that I cling to, those places of hope and faith and inspiration. And together they have helped me to get where I can deal so much better with my life today. I am living proof that recovery is possible, but you can't do this alone. You will need the help of the psychiatric community, the medical community, because what I learned was depression was not, I had been taught that depression was an evil spirit, and if I just prayed enough, or if I read God's word enough, that it would go away. And so I had to re-educate myself with clinical depression. I was struggling clinically, and like other clinical conditions, depression had to be dealt with from a medical and a psychiatric perspective. In January of 2018, my book, which tells my story of my depressive episodes and how I recovered, was published. I am very happy about this book, and it has already been a help to so many others who have been struggling with their own story of depression. I want to tell you that you can make it through this. But let me tell you again that you cannot and you must not try to do it alone. With your family, your friends, the medical and psychiatric community, and with God on my side, I realize that I can fly even if I have to do it with one wing. Thank you for letting me share.
So I want to thank NAMI, Maryland, for hosting this program today and for inviting Reverend Yerby-Hammack, who I've come to know and really respect, and me to share our struggles with depression. I started, I'd have to say that the first 30, 35 years of my life were really good years. I had no idea that
Sorry about that, Dr. Hale. I was on mute that whole time, didn't realize. I wanted to thank you, Reverend Hammack, for your story. People have been commenting saying that you have been incredibly brave and transparent and such an incredible woman. We did have a question that came through that I wanted to clarify for you. People are asking how you fell and what that piece was like, if you had hit your head in any way, things of that nature. Would you be able to clarify that part of your story?
Sure. I woke up, I had a very painful leg cramp that morning. And so it was the early morning, maybe about 5:30, 5 o'clock. And I woke up, jumped up from that cramp, and I went to walk it out. And somewhere between walking between my bedroom and my bathroom, began to feel very weird. I thought to myself, this must be how it feels when people faint. I also thought to myself, this must be how it feels if I'm about to die. I didn't know what was about to happen. And I lost all use of my body. I don't know if it was a panic attack. I don't know if I was indeed fainting. I didn't go to the hospital that day because I was afraid, but I did go that Monday to see my primary care physician. And there was nothing wrong medically, blood pressure and everything. He suspected that probably because I jumped up, perhaps my blood pressure dropped suddenly. And also I received, I was checked for blood clots. I was sent to radiology and there were no blood clots. So, I have not had that episode again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for clarifying for our audience. And
Sure.
Dr. Hale, thank you so much for jumping in while I was muted. But I'll go ahead and turn off my camera now.
okay. Well, everything working well now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. Well, now that we've got the technical part behind us, again, I'm Dr. Dan Hale, and I want to express my appreciation to NAMI Maryland for all of their work. I really enjoy working with all chapters of NAMI, especially with NAMI Maryland, and I really appreciate the invitation to come and share some of my struggles today, which are in some ways similar to Reverend Yerby-Hammack's. You'll hear some similarity, but also some differences. I'm fortunate in that I can say, can't get my, see if I can get my, there we go. I did not experience any depression or any unusual sadness, out of the ordinary sadness. In the first 30 or 35 years of my life, I would describe my early years as very good years. Came from a very stable, secure home. Didn't see any depression in my family members. really wasn't that familiar with depression at all. Went off to college, had a great 4 years at college. I loved every minute of it. I loved all the classes I took, all the relationships I built, one of which was with the woman that would become my wife, married while I was in college. And by the end of my college years, I had become very interested in psychology, and so pursued a doctorate in clinical psychology. The photo there is from New England. I spent several years up in Western Massachusetts, and those are the Berkshire Mountains, and those were just wonderful years. So I finished my PhD, and my wife and I, both of whom were from Florida, decided to move back there. And the good years continued. We had 3 wonderful, beautiful children that we thoroughly enjoyed. I was very fortunate to obtain a professorship at Stetson University. That's the building there, one of the buildings on the left side. That town, DeLand, Florida, is just 20 miles from the beach, and I always loved the beach. And so life was very, very good in the sense of having this academic position I really enjoyed, and then on weekends being able to go to the beach with my family. And it was also where I established a psychotherapy practice. So so now when we get into my mid-30s, I would say things were still going very well. But it was in those early to mid-30s when I began what I eventually recognized was a slide, that's the way I describe it, a slide into depression. The stresses really began to pile up, and there were 3 in particular, each which sort of just had a ripple effect. So first was that I was living in the town. My parents had retired to the same community, and my father became seriously ill, and eventually died. And that was, of course, quite a loss. This was a role model for me, someone I could always depend on, and now he was gone. And then my mother became seriously ill. And just about a year after my father died, she died. And then to add on to that, I discovered, became more and more aware that my marriage was unraveling. So here I had lost my father, my mother, marriage was coming apart, all the stresses you can imagine that go with that, trying to handle the estate, trying to deal with, how were my wife and I going to separate? Would we divorce? How would we handle the children? All those things really weighed on me. And I began to decline, as I put it, emotionally. I was sadder than I used to be. I could still enjoy weekends with the kids, or evenings with the kids, and some time with my friends and colleagues, but there was more and more sadness in my life. But then something changed. Reverend Yerby-Hammack used that term, and it's true for me too. Something changed mentally and physically. And so, when I looked at these, going back over what I was experiencing, the first 4 things I've got on this list, I sort of expected them to go along with the stresses I was feeling. I was exhausted a lot because I had not only my work at school and my practice, but I was dealing with all these illness issues of family members, and then all the other stresses related to the separation and eventual divorce. I often just didn't have time to eat as well as I should. I often had trouble sleeping, so that, often I was worrying, as I tried to go to sleep, I was worrying about what would the next day hold. And then that would also impact my concentrating, because I would, be thinking, have so many different thoughts in my head. So all of those things, the exhaustion, the loss of appetite, sleep disturbance, difficulty concentrating, those didn't really surprise me because of the stress going on in my life. But then 3 other things happened that led me to realize this is more than just stress. I've become depressed, clinically depressed. And those 3 things were, I found that I just couldn't enjoy any part of my life anymore. I didn't enjoy the social time with friends. I didn't enjoy the activities with my children. there was really nothing I was looking forward to. And again, my life had been so good. Even during the stressful period, there were these bright parts of it, but those were gone. The next one is I felt absolutely worthless. I had always thought of myself, as a good son, a good father, a good husband, a good professor, a good psychologist. And now I felt like I was not good at anything. And I really became disgusted with myself. I mean, it was more than just losing self-confidence. I really didn't like the person I had become. And then on top of all that, I just felt hopeless. I couldn't enjoy life. I felt worthless, and I couldn't see things ever getting any better. So in spite of my training in psychology, my experience in psychology, I couldn't withstand those things. And I realized I needed help. And so it was really sort of a three-part recovery. And I do think recovery is the right word, because what I was after is getting the things back in my life and in me that I liked. The ability to enjoy things, the ability to be productive. So I say it was three-part. I went to my family physician. That's where I started. He knew me well. He understood what I needed the medication for. I needed medication that would help me sleep better, that would give me some energy back, and would just help me feel steadier. I often felt very shaky and fearful, and I just needed to sort of get my body back in sync. So the medication worked, and I restored much of my energy, but that still left some things I needed to deal with, because I was now facing new challenges. I needed help navigating what it was going to be like to be divorced, to be a single parent, those roles. And I also needed somebody to help me think through those thoughts and evaluate those thoughts I was having, because were they really rational? Or was it rational to think that no one would ever want to be my friend or want to be in a relationship with me, or that I was a terrible parent and would always be a terrible parent? So I really needed a psychologist to help me work through that. As Reverend Yerby-Hammack mentioned, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, was very helpful to me. And then social support. Even with the medication and the psychotherapist, I really needed and depended on wonderful friends who just stepped forward to help me. And so I did recover. I mean, I would say I fully recovered. I felt I came back at full strength. I could enjoy life again. I could be very productive. And so the good years returned. And, I could enjoy my children, 3 wonderful children, each with their own distinct personality and interest. And I just loved being with them and watching them grow. And as enthusiastic as I watched them in the swimming pool, at their meets or in the ball game, so forth, it was just wonderful. I got back to enjoying my work. I enjoyed teaching classes, having students come to talk with me, share with me their concerns, and let me help them. My career really sort of reached a new level. I published a couple books. I'd never thought I'd publish anything, but I published a couple books. I was being invited to speak at conferences and at hospitals, medical centers, and universities. And then certainly a wonderful part of this, the good years here, was that I had found, met, and married this wonderful woman who could provide me so much love and support. So, mid-30s, the sort of depression came. I recovered from that. Things were going very well again. I hoped that I would be one of those individuals who would never experience a second episode. I knew that was always a risk, but I was hoping that I'd be one of those. But that wasn't to be. So about 15 years after my first episode, when life was going very well, I couldn't point to any major stressor in my life, the dark times returned, and they were darker than ever. All those symptoms came back, so that I was sad every minute of the day. I lost the ability to enjoy my children, my work, my students. I lost my appetite, lost weight. Sleep disturbance was really bad, trouble going to sleep, waking up early, not being able to go back to sleep, exhausted all the time. I know I moved more slowly. My thinking was slower, my talking was slower. I thought about death a lot. I was never suicidal, thank goodness. But I didn't think I would lead a long life. I feared it would end too early, one way or another. And the worthlessness came back. I just dreaded being around people, and just feared going into the classroom. Felt like I would be called out by students for not being smart enough, good enough. So I knew that I needed to get treatment again. This time I tried to go the same way, but I ran into a little bit of a hurdle there. My family physician, the one who treated me the first time, was out of the country. And so I saw someone else who was covering his practice. And this physician wasn't familiar with the medication that my first doctor had used. So he tried a couple of the new antidepressants, and neither of them worked. They did not help my depression, and they actually brought on some anxiety. So I realized I needed to get more specialized help. So I was able to see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist met with me a few times, really got to know exactly what was going on with me physically, mentally, and prescribed an antidepressant medication that worked very well. Able to sleep, get my energy back, felt stable, steady again. And I went back for a few sessions of psychotherapy too, because there were still some adjustments that are needed. And once again, I had these wonderful friends, colleagues who stepped forward and helped me. And so over a few months, I recovered. So I came back strong again. And those are the two episodes I've had, but I still live with not necessarily fear, but concern that depression could return. And so I really pay a lot of attention to what I should do to minimize the risk of that, because it's such a painful, scary thing to go through. So this is sort of my plan. One is I have stayed on that antidepressant medication. I know that surprises some people, but I've now been on this medication for 15 years. I know it works, and I know it reduces my risk. I realize some people feel like you want to get out the medication as fast as you can. I don't think that's the way, at least for me, that I think of this. For me, what's more important is how well am I functioning? Am I back at 90, 95, or even 100%? Next thing is I realize I need to establish and maintain healthy routines. And so part of that is getting enough rest and sleep. And when I say enough, actually it's getting the right amount. What I mean is I need about 7 or 8 hours sleep. And if I have 7 or 8 hours, that's pretty much it. But you know, sometimes after those 7 or 8 hours, it doesn't happen a lot, but occasionally I'm feeling a little sad, a little depressed. And the temptation is maybe I should just stay in bed and try and sleep it off. And I've learned that's not the right thing. For me, if I've already gotten those 7 or 8 hours, even if I'm feeling a little sad, that's actually the time to get out of bed, get the shower, take the shower, eat my breakfast. There's sort of an optimal amount. Exercise the same way. There are times when, I don't mean that I have to be at the gym on the treadmill or jogging out in the community, but I know there's a certain amount of physical activity that helps keep my mind as well as my body safe and healthy. And so there are times when I feel like I'm beginning to feel sad. I'd just like to sit here or curl up, and I realize this is the time. I at least need to go walk around the block, do something like that. Then I also think certainly pay attention to my diet, making sure I'm eating regular meals and eating healthy foods. And then the next one is, and I think this is especially appropriate in these sort of difficult, tumultuous times. You know, these are difficult times in terms of the pandemic, in times of what's going on with a lot of social discontent, that I find it important that I don't let that overwhelm me, that I certainly want to stay aware of the latest news, current events, but I don't need to be listening to all the controversy, all the arguing, all the fighting all the time. I want to make sure that I spend some of my time, good part of my time, around people that are good for me and reading about people who lead meaningful, good lives and listening to music that helps lift me up. And finally, I find it helpful to share my story. I like to, much as Reverend Yerby-Hammack said, I have learned that, that as bad as depression is, there is hope, but you've got to go out and get the help. And so anything I can do to help destigmatize it and to offer people hope makes me feel better about my life. So thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Yerby-Hammack and Dr. Dan Hale, for sharing your personal testimonies during this great time of need. We would like to open up the webinar now for any questions that you may have. And remember that every participant will stay muted to avoid background noise, but you can type your question into the chat box, the question box at the right-hand side of the screen if you're viewing from a computer, or at the bottom of the screen if viewing from a phone. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, or if you have a comment about the webinar today, please enter into the chat box now. If we do not have time to answer each question today, we will provide our contact information at the end of the webinar for anyone who may wish to reach us about it. So I'm going to look through the questions right now. We had a couple come in, and either Reverend or Dr. Dan Hale, whenever you think that the question pertains to you or you would like to jump in, feel free to. But these are kind of generalized questions that both of you can answer. One of the questions that had come in for depression was, it was a question about continuing treatment after you start to feel normal, or like you feel like your depression's going away, whether or not you should continue therapy and medication. I think Dr. Dan Hale did a good job answering that as well. Reverend, if you wanted to chime in on that, feel free to.
Yes, I would say that you need to continue it if you find it helped. I did not mention almost 2 years exactly to the day in 2014, my husband passed away. And between 2014 and 2015, when I started to hit the 1-year anniversary of his passing, I slipped into another depressive episode. Earlier in 2015, I had stopped medications. I talked to my psychiatrist and I weaned myself off, and I thought that I was doing really well. But when I hit that, I got to that depressive episode, I didn't want to go back on medications. I thought, I've got this. I've got my treatment plan, my action steps, and but it didn't work. And so in February, at the and really with the help of my daughter to help me see I needed to go back on medications, I did. So I did. I went back to medications, and I am still on meds today. I take a low dose of my medication, and it helps me. I've decided that I need to stay up with that. And I also do talk therapy once a year. I see my therapist and discuss anything that I need, and she's there if I need any other help throughout that year.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Dan Hale, do you have anything to add to that question?
Well, I would just say that the evidence, if you want to look at the clinical studies, that would say that if you've had one episode of depression and you go on antidepressant medication, once all of your symptoms have remitted or gone, it's advisable to stay on it at least 6 to 12 more months before going off. So it's, the time at which you really start feeling good again, stay with it for at least 6 to 12 months. But be talking to your doctor all along the way. Make sure you're reporting any side effects, or is the medication having enough effect, and then discuss when to go off it. But plan on staying on at least 6 to 12 months after you're feeling better.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions that came in was for the Reverend. It was about your fall And so asking about how your fall kind of led to depression, like if you experienced any head trauma that caused you to kind of have symptoms of depression that you haven't had before, or if you could just elaborate on that.
Okay. Fortunately, I did not hit my head. I made it back to my bed, which I think cushioned my fall, so I didn't hit my head. And looking back over my life and dealing with my therapist and talking with her, I think the episode in 2012 was kind of like the icing on the cake. All of my life, I had been experiencing things. And in 2003, I look back and I was going through panic and anxiety. I did not recognize it as such. And so with my lifestyle, with all of the things that I had, I think it was just, it was just kind of like something that would happen because I did have a lot of stress, workaholic, not taking a lot of time to look at me, to care for me. So I think when I did make it up, I just think that it was just building up. It was just a build up over the years.
Gotcha, I understand. Dr. Dan Hale, I feel like this would be a good question for you. Does depression present itself differently amongst men and women, and what are the differences that you've seen between men and women that have depression?
Yes. As a general rule, I mean, certainly it can go, it can be a lot of similarity. A couple of things that women tend to really turn a lot of it against themselves. And so they are feeling negative things about themselves, and they're more likely to sort of recognize and describe what they're feeling as depression, as sadness. Men tend to, just again, as a general rule, display more irritability, perhaps even anger, so their dissatisfaction, their unhappiness is often out, or they're blaming others for things, their boss, their friend, rather than sort of being so negative about themselves. And they're less likely to, use the term depressed or I'm sad. So they just don't feel good and they're just upset about things.
Gotcha, thank you. Another question was if you have any information on resistant depression or dysthymia, if you ever heard of that, or how to treat that kind of depression.
So I can try to answer some of that. So dysthymia, which is this is a term we still use, but also a new term that goes along with it is persistent depressive disorder, or what some people would describe as a low-grade depression. So the symptoms are not as severe as the ones that we've gone over. I think Reverend Yerby-Hammack and I pretty much cover the 8 or 9 symptoms we associate with clinical depression. So you heard them a couple times today. So the symptoms are not as severe, but they last for at least 2 years. So this person might be describing themselves most of the time as down in the dumps, able to get to work or carry on things, but just not feeling good about themselves. So it doesn't quite reach the level of clinical depression. That should still be, I mean, it's a shame to go through life that way when there are treatments. So you should talk to your doctor or mental health professional. Medications can help, as can psychotherapy. So that's sort of the persistent dysthymia or persistent depressive disorder. Treatment-resistant disorder, there's no absolute agreement on that, what that term refers to, but generally we talk about if people have tried 2 different approaches to therapy. Let's say they've tried 2 different medications, antidepressant medications, they've stayed with each long enough that it should have had an effect and they've had the right dose, and they're not getting any benefit, then we describe that as treatment-resistant depression. And there are several options that are considered for that. I'll mention 3 briefly. I know we're going to be doing another seminar where we're going to cover this in more in depth with a psychiatrist who can elaborate on these better than me. One treatment is ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy, which I know is scary. It's a term, but itself, it's not. Part of that fear comes from a movie of back in the 70s, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That is not the way ECT works today. ECT is effective for those who've had treatment-resistant depression. There's also something called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is not invasive at all, and can be done on an outpatient basis. And a new one that we're hearing more about is ketamine or esketamine, which can often have a very immediate beneficial effect, but it has to be closely monitored. So those are things you can, on your own sort of check out those options. And again, I think in January, we're going to be having a webinar with Dr. Hammack, who can speak to those in more detail.
Okay, thank you. Reverend, this is a question for you that came in. And this is something, the beginning of the question is also something that Dr. Dan Hale can answer, would be, how do you know if you've recovered? And then the second question was for Reverend Yerba. How does the congregation treat you? Because some people may feel like you may not be able to carry out your duties because of your depression, or how does that factor in with your community?
Okay. I have been received well overall. I remember the day that I shared my story in my congregation, and I was supported with love and support. And I also found out that there were many within my congregation that were suffering in silence. And I've found that because I share my story, I preach out a lot. I've shared my story so much, and people are actually appreciative. The one thing is sometimes people want to keep you, how can I say this? Because we believe so much in prayer or whatever, sometimes to say that I need my medication, there are a few people that might, overturn that and say, yeah, but if you pray, you'll get out or whatever. And so for the most part, I tell people my faith and my medication go hand in hand. So I pray over my pill every morning and I take it. So it's not one with the other. It's the faith and with those psychiatric parts. My life as a whole has been made better because I've learned to keep my faith and my psychiatric practices hand in hand.
Gotcha. Thank you. So the first part of the question that I asked was, how do you know if you have recovered, or how did you know that you were starting to become into remission from when you first had an episode or were doing better with your depression, if you both want to answer that?
Well, I actually began to physically feel better. Like I said, I love to eat. So I was able to start to eat again, which meant my weight was coming back. When I went back to work, it was very scary for me, but eventually I was able to start working again. And I just saw light at the end of the tunnel. I began to enjoy my life again. And even now, I there's still many stressors that I have to go through, but because I still practice these things that help me stay better, I'm able to enjoy my life, and I'm able to manage my life. I'm managing my life now as a widow without my husband, which meant a lot of things changed. My finances changed, those things. Now, even dealing with the pandemic, that's a stressor. I'm caring for, joining my siblings and caring for my elderly parents, taking care of their needs. So there are other stressors. I'm an executive pastor now. So I have other things that I didn't even have before. But because I am staying true to these things, I believe that I continue my recovery. And I think that once I stop those things, that I will probably slip back into a depressive state.
Well, I'll just add one thing to that, because the being able to sleep again, the energy coming back. But one thing particularly stands out to me, which was when I began to be able to laugh at things. When I was in the middle of my depression, I could hear a joke or I could see a funny show, and up here in my head, I could say, that was funny, but I couldn't even laugh. And then when I realized how long I had gone, weeks and weeks and weeks, without simply laughing. And when somebody said something and I laughed, they noticed, they said, we haven't seen you laugh in a long time. And I realized that's true. So that ability, just that very basic fundamental ability to enjoy something. So laughter was one of the signs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, I have another question, and it is like pertaining towards family. So one of the questions was, is depression hereditary, like passed down through the parents or through the genetics line? And do you have any tips on dealing with your family members having depression, or anything that your family did while you had depression in your really low states that helped you the most?
I do have my mom. She was not diagnosed with depression, but she did say that she had postmortem depression after one of her births. I'm the eldest of 6 children. And actually, now that I think about it, that daughter that she had the postmortem depression, that daughter suffers from depression and anxiety as well. And for a time, we were seeing the same psychiatrist, unbeknownst to us. I also have a sister who suffered from substance misuse. I have a brother who struggles with depression. He's not taking medications or whatever, or been diagnosed, but he does suffer from depression as well. My family, even in the very beginning, they were very confused when I told them I was about to enter the Shepherd Pratt Adult Day Hospital. They were very confused. We were confused about the medications, confused about what all that looked like, but they were always there. There are still some parts of my story I won't tell because they were very hurtful, and I do it to protect them, not necessarily protect me. But because of my state, I was kind of the hurricane that upset a lot of things, but they've always been there with love and support, and that is very necessary.
So I would say along the same lines, yes, depression or mood disorders runs in families in the same way that, let's say, heart disease does. And that doesn't mean that if your parents were depressed or one of them, that you will definitely become depressed. But are the odds greater than if you didn't have it in your family? Yes. My sister and I, when we look back at our mother, we both believe that what we saw that we didn't recognize as children was that she was depressed. Periods where she would just sort of close the door to her bedroom and just say, I need to be left alone. So I think it was there, and it's gone down to my children as well too. So a couple of my children have struggled with depression too. One with very, very difficult symptoms.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and there was a lot of questions that came in about COVID and what the both of you do to help cope with your depression during COVID, or what you've changed since COVID happened.
When COVID first happened, I could feel my anxiety rising, and that's why when I did meet with my therapist and talked about all the things that were going on or whatever, I made the decision that this is probably, because I was thinking that it's okay now for me to wean off of my meds again. But we both agreed, as I began to talk the things through, I was like, oh no, I better stay right here. So I have stayed there. But I've also, also as a way, again, because I am a preacher, a pastor, a teacher, my passion is to preach and to teach. And so really, actually, since April, I launched a Facebook Live, devotional moments with Preacher Pam. And so every day from Monday through Friday, every day at 10 a.m., I go Facebook Live and I preach and I teach, and I have a community of people that join me. We pray together, and that has helped them, but it's also helped me because it also brings these people into my space and we support each other as well.
So just a two-part answer. So one is the levels of depression have really gone so high during COVID. So if you're experiencing symptoms of depression, you're like about a third of the adult population. Just was looking at the survey this morning. We do regular surveys in November. Almost a third of the adult population have been experiencing some symptoms of depression. I do what I sort of mentioned there on my last slide, which is I limit what I consider sort of the toxic information, my exposure to that. I don't keep the TV on all day or listen to it all night. I try to stay abreast, I limit that, and I make sure that that balances being around good people, encouraging people, good music, good books, and just make sure that I discipline myself that way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hale and Dr. Hale and Reverend Yerby-Hammack, with all of your expertise. It certainly sounds like you're a doctor. I wanted to thank you everyone for joining us today, and I know we had several individuals in our comments and questions box stating that they could relate to the stories they heard today. And I wanted to let everyone know that if you are struggling with depression or if you have a family member struggling, there are many resources that can support you. NAMI Maryland does offer free support groups and programs for individuals with a mental health condition and for family members. These are all virtual at this time. And we also have a helpline which you can call to be connected with resources in the community. You can visit our website at www.namimd.org or call us at 410-884-8691. And this webinar has been recorded and it will be emailed to everyone tomorrow if anyone would like to review the information or if they would like to send it to anybody who may find this information helpful. It will also be uploaded to our website. Again, that's www.namimd.org. We hope that this webinar has been helpful for you this afternoon. At the end of the webinar today, you will be asked to complete a short survey on the aspects of this webinar that you felt were helpful, could be improved, and what you would like to see in future webinars. Each person that completes the survey will be entered into a drawing to win a $25 Amazon gift card. This is only one webinar in a series of educational webinars that NAMI Maryland plans to host. Additional topics for our webinars include treatment and beyond treatment supports. This survey will help us determine how we can best support you during this time. Our next webinar, entitled Treating Depression, Myth versus Reality, will take place on Tuesday, January 19th from 12 to 1 p.m. I will include the registration information in the chat now for anyone who may wish to join us. We wish you all a safe and healthy rest of your week, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us through our website or by phone. And again, that's 410-884-8691 should you need any additional resources or support. Thank you so much, and we hope everyone has a great day.